This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Full disclosure in going into this episode today. I've never done an episode like this, and I felt that since we are in the season of giving right now, that I can't think of anything at this moment in time, on my end at least, that would be more apropos than to perhaps speed a case along, if you will. And the reason I say that is there is a case that has come to my attention from our friends at Othram. And this case actually begins all the way back in 1983, when there was a small vehicle, actually a Honda Civic, that was found fully engulfed in flames. And inside that Honda Civic were the burning remains of a fellow who no one still to this day knows what his name is. Now, the reason I say the season of giving is that Othram has raised just over, I think, $2,300 right now in order to get this fellow identified. And the story that I'm going to lay on you right now is something I can guarantee that most of you have never heard the like of. So without further ado, myself and Brother Dave are going to tell you what's what. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I had to do one of those cartoon double takes the other day. You know, I didn't have the sound effect though, you know, when I did it, because when I saw this case come across my feed, all I could think of was, wait, did I read that right? Because it said Othram.
Yeah.
But the problem is when it said Othram, the case is still open.
Right.
And they had published an article about this thing. And then I saw the number 1983, and I saw that there was conviction in the case, but I saw that there was not an ID of the victim in the case.
This is the most jacked up case you've ever sent me. And you've sent me stuff where people have chopped off their own heads. I mean, you've sent me some crazy stuff, Joe. This is by far. And here's the kick, friends. I want to review what Joe just said about Othram and raising money. Othram does not get funding from the government or other agencies. When they go to solve these cases that we oftentimes talk about on the show, it's crowdfunding. It's by people being interested in a particular story, a particular location, a geography, what have you. And that's why we do them, because the work they're doing at Othram is not being done anywhere else. And they don't have an unlimited supply of money to get these things done. I thought they did when we first started. I thought, surely, you know, there's money for this. There is not. And that's why Joe and I take the time, because here's the scoop. In 1983, May 28th, 1983, the death of Edward L. Cates. Edward Cates was a former Mississippi Assistant Attorney General. He was a Jackson City commissioner. This is a 55-year-old man who was very accomplished. And his car, a 1977 Honda Civic, was found in a field fully engulfed and in flames, and a body charred beyond the ability to be positively identified. So they used what they had at the time, basic information, license plate, who owned the car, basic size of the charred remains, and decided, well, this must be Edward Cates. So they actually had a funeral for Mr. Cates because he was a veteran. It was a full military funeral, and it was a sad day for the people of that area, a public servant, you know, the whole nine. Thing is, they never got a positive ID on the corpse. They buried it as Edward Cates, but a couple of weeks after all of this happens, Joe, Edward Cates' wife or ex-wife starts getting money orders from different places in Georgia from a man named Kurtz, Curts. Now, when your wife starts getting money in the mail from somebody they don't know, she's got two choices, and it really goes to her character. Some women would cash it and go on, hey, free money. But not Mrs. Cates. Something hit her as not quite right. Now, she knew who her husband was, and you're going to find out who he was as well in a minute. But she calls her attorney and says, something's up with this. Her attorney says, yeah, you're right. And the attorney calls investigators on the case because they're still trying to figure out what really happened because they don't know, Joe. All they know is we got the body of this guy and we couldn't even identify it. Something's not right. Couldn't they know? Didn't they know when they buried the body that an accelerant had been used on the body? I mean, what could they tell, Joe? Because they did not bury Edward L. Cates. They buried somebody, but that's why we're doing the show today. Because, friends, they buried a body, but it wasn't Edward L. Cates. Edward Cates faked his death.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was telling you about this case the other day, it brought to mind one of my favorite Matthew Perry movies. And matter of fact, one of my favorite Bruce Willis movies is The Whole Nine Yards. One of the funniest movies I have ever seen. It might not be to everyone's taste, but it actually involved a circumstance that's kind of similar to this, but it was all mob related and all that sort of stuff, like Hollywood does. And it was much more complex. So I don't know, maybe it wasn't much more complex. What was really interesting though, is that, this is out of Mississippi and up around north. Where the car was found was actually up north of Jackson. So if you're coming out of Jackson and you're on the major thoroughfare there, I think it's Highway 55 or Interstate 55 that will of course take you all the way to Memphis, running parallel to the Natchez Trace. This car was found, and the sheriff at the time said, "Could be an accident. Don't really know."
I actually got his direct quote, Joe. I found him in a news piece from 1983. This is what Billy Noble, the sheriff of Madison County at the time, said. It could be foul play, could be an accidental. Hard to say at this particular time. They didn't know.
Yeah, you don't. And, with fully involved car fires in particular, you've got a lot of choice. If you've got a home, for instance, that burns up, it's a much more kind of static thing that's going on. Back during this time, during 1983, there were in the news, if you remember, going to the Ford Motor Company, there were, cases of Pintos blowing up. And that had continued on into the early 80s, and people died in those things. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, if you remember the Yugo, I don't know if you recall the Yugo.
Yeah, I do.
I worked a couple of Yugo fires where they collided. Yeah, where they collided with another vehicle and exploded. I remember one that got so hot. I was on I-85 in Atlanta, and Dave, this thing ignited. It was 5 guys from Guatemala that had been working at the airport all night, and they were on their way home to their apartment that they all shared. They'd been cleaning like ashtrays and doing upholstery cleaning on jets down at Hartsfield, and one of the guys, in an effort to get out of the vehicle, knocked out the vent window on the side in a Yugo and tried to climb out. And I'll never forget, half of his body was hanging out. The whole thing went up. Wow. So you had cases back then where, the gas tank is literally located in this really dangerous area right beneath the rear seat, and these things will explode. But then you have to think about, well, is this an explosion related event, or is this some kind of ignitable event where something like an accelerant has been applied to a vehicle and the whole thing catches on fire. What kind of sustainability? Because, if you just take a match, Dave, and you throw it into the interior of a car, you might burn your seat, you might burn the carpet, but the thing is not going to catch fire and the whole thing is going to burn down. You have to have an initiant, what's referred to as an initiant with this, and some kind of chemical compound, primarily some kind of accelerant like gas, or I guess you could use a road flare, but like with gas that has some kind of sustainability where it vaporizes. The air actually kind of catches on fire, superheated in this environment. So those things that have like a high burning point, like a carpet or an upholstery on the seat, they're going to get so hot in there that the thing will ignite and begin to burn. The thing about it is, and I urge anybody within the sound of my voice right now, if you've never seen a 1977 Honda Civic, please do yourself a favor and go take a look at it. Kimmy's father actually had one that he commuted. He was an air traffic controller in Hampton, Georgia, and he actually commuted back and forth in one. It was a yellow one. Had it for you. Still had it when we got married in the late 90s. Wow. And he swore by that car. But this thing is so tight. I'm sorry?
Most people swear at them, but
yeah. Well, I don't know. It was a Honda, and it sounds like a go-kart when it runs, but it was rather dependable. But the thing about it is if you get inside of a closed space, Dave, and you've got accelerant in there, first off, every bit of oxygen is going to be consumed in the twinkling of an eye. All right. So if you're thinking about someone being alive in the vehicle, every bit of breathable air in there is gone. And people don't think about that most of the time. The other thing that happens if you're alive inside of a vehicle is that superheated air, okay, that you breathe in. Did you know this, Dave, that we can look into the mouth and into the airway of a victim at autopsy, and we will see these highly irritated focal areas of trauma inside the airway because of the heat that the airway is being subjected to. Okay. Wow. Now you don't get these if like you just throw a body in there and set them on fire. So the actual airway itself, the nostrils, the mouth, they'll all sustain this kind of trauma. Just imagine the worst sore throat you can ever imagine and multiply it by a factor of 1,000. And so that superheated air is now going down into the lungs. You have all these inflammatory changes that at a cellular level initiate almost immediately. Then on top of that, you're still breathing for a second. So you remember how I mentioned the carpet, right? The seats, okay, the gear lever, the steering wheel that's covered in plastic. Now you're breathing all that debris in as well. Wow. So not only do you have this kind of debris that turns into almost like ash that's floating about, did you know that like the chemical substrate that all of these things are made out of, and did you know a couple of these things are like heavy metal? It releases like arsenic into the air. Wow. You'll see this inside of homes as well. And of course, all this stuff is petroleum based. You'll get those levels in the bloodstream if they breathe it. There'll be trace amounts of this, not to mention I'm always talking about carboxyhemoglobin level, which comes about as a result of breathing in carbon monoxide. So you get all of these kind of chemical indicators relative to were they alive or were they dead at the time of this. But I got to tell you, with this case that we're talking about today, this unknown subject that still to this day remains unknown, it's not just what he was breathing. Oh my Lord, it was the trauma he sustained as well. Y'all, I got to tell you, we're just coming off of Thanksgiving. You talk about things you're thankful for. Well, first off, Thanksgiving, I'm thankful for Dave Mack. I'm thankful for him that he's in my life and he's my partner. And secondly, he's one of the best gifts I can possibly receive at Christmas time. And here is why. This man knows no boundaries when it comes to collecting data. He is absolutely amazing. And this is an old, cold case. And Dave has created, I would say, Dave, probably one of the most robust injury lists that you and I have potentially ever had on any episode of Body Bags. And it was even kind of surprising to me. And you were kind of excited about it in a good way, because that's what we do on Body Bags, right? We talk about trauma.
Yeah.
Now, from your perspective, let's just go through some of these insults. We'll put it to you that way, that this body has sustained, this body that has no name. Okay. Right. Has no name. He's the unknown person. He's like High Plains Drifter. We had no idea who he is. All right. So Dave, it's on you, brother.
Let me just show you what caught my attention and what made me go back and dig further is I went back to the 1983 news reports and was looking at different quotes and different things from officials, including the sheriff, who said, we don't know. We don't know what happened. Now you've got a guy, Edward Cates, who was a former assistant attorney general. He's on the city council. This is a man who was very involved and engaged in a lot of different things and a very well-known lawyer. And so that's not cutting it with me. To not have an answer on that just bothered me. But it bothered me that the fire was that they went with, well, it's his car. It must be him. That doesn't cut it with me. And this is, again, 1983. It's not ancient times. We're not drawing cave drawings here. So,
hey, can I say something real quick there? I think that's fascinating that he is, let me see if I can get this right in my mind, that he is not just a government official. He's also a prosecuting government official.
Yeah.
Dave, this just kind of came to mind. Do you think that he had an awareness perhaps of how this case would be handled?
He knew it from the beginning to the end. And
because he's going to have an insight that nobody else would. He's got the 30,000 foot view on cases and how they operate. Right. I don't know. It just kind of, I had to say that.
Well, we know so much about the ending. We know the end. That's why I mentioned what his undoing. Okay. After they bury Edward Cates with a full military funeral.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks later, his wife starts getting money orders that are sent from various locations around Georgia, and they hone in on it because she's not expecting anything from anyone. She gives it to her lawyer. The lawyer turns it to investigators, and within 30 days, they track down this ain't Edward Cates in the ground. Edward Cates is in an apartment in Lawrenceville, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. Drive up 85 north.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I tell you that now is because now that you know he faked his own death, and we're trying to identify the person in the car. Joe, this person that was in the car, something as I was reading this list of injuries, they were shocking. But what got me more was that I read through it before I went back and made notes. And at the very ending, it says he was this individual is a man, and he was alive before he was burned. He was alive before he was burned. Now, friends, alive before the fire began. That's what the pathologist ruled. This person in the car had a fracture to his left fibula, a fracture to the 12th thoracic vertebrae, fractures to the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th left ribs, and possibly 11th right rib. The body was severely burned in the presence of accelerants, and this burning probably did not cause the apparent absence of teeth. Now, Joe, I thought that was a powerful thing to include in this.
Yeah.
Because you've got a body. By the way, 2 ribs, the left 7th and 8th ribs showed, quote, fresh fractures that might have occurred around the time of death or during post-mortem handling. Now, Joseph Scott Morgan, I want to start with a question there, and then you can break all the rest of this down. But
yeah, sure.
If I'm a defense attorney, how could you possibly say that we're not sure about 2 of these fractures here? They might have occurred during post-mortem handling. Is it possible that all of the fractures were from post-mortem handling, trying to get the guy out of the car that's on fire? Charred remains?
Yeah, I don't think that would be the case, because the other ones were not specifically identified as having some type of post-mortem identifier. Okay. I think that and let me tell you why. Now, as many of you can imagine, people that are subjected to intense heat in these environments are very fragile. I mean, the bodies are very, very fragile. I've had them, let's see, how can I say this? I've actually had bodies that will, depend upon the amount of heat and the concentration and how long it was sustained, I've had bodies fracture in my hands or even disintegrate. They'll almost pulpify sometimes. And like, I'll give you, for instance, I was always weary, or leery. Let me rephrase that. I was leery, like if I had a rib cage that was exposed, of touching any of the ribs.
Okay.
because you can actually have them snap off in your hand. As a matter of fact, one of the opening chapter actually in my memoir, that I talk about an event that kind of sets the table for, my life as a death investigator. And it happened on, Georgia 400. And it was a Ford Ranger truck that had died. I mean, a kid was on the way to work in the early morning hours, and he ran into a bridge abutment, and the whole thing caught on fire. And I was going to examine his body inside of the cab because the body was almost melded to the springs of the seat. So I was just like looking in the vehicle and taking photos and everything. And just as I did, you have to understand, I'm looking through the driver's window, which is now burst out because of the heat. And I'm looking in and kind of wrapping my head around, and I've got a camera in one hand and going to transfer it to my left hand. And he was in a pugilistic posture, which we see with fire victims, where their arms draw up and they almost look like they're boxing, hence pugilistic. And his left hand brushed against my right cheek. And I reached up reactively like this with my left hand, and his hand and his wrist snapped off in my hand. Wow. And that's how fragile, these bodies can be. So to be able to make that determination in that sense, I think for those 2 ribs, it's inconclusive. Mm-hmm. However, I think that what is significant, though, is that on the other injuries, they're noting fractures. And I'm fascinated by the fact that the lion's share of these fractures, let me just go back and just to validate this just for a second, where we're talking about the left fibula, which is, of course, the fibula. There's two bones in your lower body. In your lower extremities. So you've got the tib fib, all right, in your lower legs. And so you've got the left fibula and you got the right fibula. And the left ribs, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and possibly the 11th rib. Dave, these are heavily weighted to the left aspect of this guy. I got to tell you, brother, when I see this and they're saying that they're not saying these are post-mortem, so you cannot exclude ante-mortem here. Dave, this sounds like a pedestrian. This guy, because those are consistent with like an impact injury. Like if you just think, if people in your mind will just envision, I don't know if you guys have ever had that moment in time where, if you had a lump of coal in your butt, you'd wind up with a diamond. It gets so tight because it scares you to death when you're a pedestrian walkway. I've had this happen. I had it happen in London, and because I'm a yank and I wasn't looking the right direction, and I heard tires screeching. So as the car squats, and the brakes are being applied, it kind of, the front end dips down. Well, if you're walking across the street with your left side exposed, all right, the first point of impact is probably going to be your lower leg or around your knee. All right. So you think about boom, you hit, and then what does your body do? Well, your body does not get thrown forward. Guess what it does? It bends and it lands potentially on the leading edge of the grill or on the hood, and then the car will go over it. Okay. And so that would account for these fractures of the rib cage on the left side, which is very, very impressive here. I mean, this is extensive, and that energy transfer went all the way through his left side, where he's actually got, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, he's got his 12th thoracic vertebra is actually fractured. So that's going to be like mid-range down your back. You've got the cervical, and then you've got the thoracic bodies in there. So it would have squarely have been like probably at the level of, hang on, I keep going back and forth here. Let me get my anatomy right. Probably about the level of that 9th, 10th rib area where that energy transfer is going through on the left side, and it hits that 11th, the 12th thoracic vertebra. And that bone is very robust. Probably vertebral bodies are some of the most robust bones in our body. Plus, they're oddly shaped. Some people refer to them. There's several categories of types of bones. This is an irregular bone. It's got these little points all over it and everything. The anatomy is kind of fascinating, when you take a look at it. And of course, it's got the internal canal that the spinal cord passes through and all that. But they're very robust, and they're robust because they have to be. They're protecting the spinal cord. This thing's fractured, Dave. So there's a specific transfer of energy. I'm thinking if this guy, just go with me here just for a second, just indulge my insanity for a second. What if some bright bulb says, I'm going to fake my death. I'm going to ride around until I find some poor soul that's just walking across the street, I don't know, in Jackson, Mississippi at night, and I'm going to run them down. All right. Well, when I run them down, they're going to be dead. And if they're not dead, I'm going to make sure that they're dead, because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my little car, I'm going to drive it up the road to Canton, Mississippi, and park it on the side of the road. And I'm going to go get, a couple of gallons of gasoline, poured in the cab, set this thing on fire. And I got my little, my little ditty bag, and I'm off I go, man. I'm going to disappear into the eastern sunrise and leave Mississippi behind. I don't know. That's just one of the things I was thinking about. What's fascinating, though, is that with this case, we don't have, I haven't come across it yet, but I have yet to come across any information about the anthropomorphic examination of the body. Okay. Like what race are we talking about? Because, they can race skulls. They can do racial determination on skulls. We can do sex. Obviously, we can do age. Now, I think that they do give an age description, don't they, Dave?
They do. The original description was 25 to 55-year-old male, 5'6" tall. Okay. That was the initial one. But when they came back and spent more time on it to determine the actual age, they came up with an age of 39 years old, and a very specific 39 years old. And again, and actually, my notes here, 35 to 55 was the original age range they gave. This is from the pathologist at the time. This is the pathologist who ruled that this victim was alive before the fire began. Now, Joe, we ran down the list of these injuries, and how can you possibly survive all those injuries only to die in a fire?
Well, I think that, yeah, you can. You would be, and oh my God, this just goes from horrific to horrific.
Right.
Because let's just say, again, continuing on with my thought here, let's just say that he was struck by a car. Now you got to gather this poor soul up, whoever they are, throw them in the car. They don't say anything in their examination about the status of the brain or the skull, like skull fractures, that sort of thing. And that's kind of hard, because this is one thing, and I don't know that I've ever mentioned this before, but let me go with it. There are fire-related fractures that occur. The heat has to rise to a certain temperature, and it has to be sustained, and heat will fracture bone. One of the first places to fracture will be the skull. And what happens contained within the skull, and this is kind of graphic just so people understand beforehand, did you know that the brain begins to boil inside of the skull in that closed-in space, and it creates almost, it almost creates steam within that area, and the internal and external table, I've seen it happen, of the skull will actually fracture. All right. Now, there's some debate as to whether or not the boiling of the brain actually creates that fracture, or if it's the thinness of the skull, because they are thin, particularly if you get around the temporal bones and that sort of thing. They will fracture pretty easily, but heat can certainly do that. I would. The brain, I don't know if it would be appreciable in this case, as far as like if you could determine any kind of cerebral trauma with this guy, because not only does it boil, you know what else it does? The brain shrinks. It shrinks also. Even if it doesn't reach a boiling point, the brain will shrink and kind of contract, and it really kind of screws up your ability to do an effective assessment. That's why in certain circumstances, fire can be really useful if you're trying to hide things like this. And again, it all goes to the sustainability and the level of heat that is attained inside of a vehicle, how long it burns, how intense that temperature was, all this sort of thing. So I don't know, Dave. My thought is, and I was talking about going from horror to even more horrific, is that if this guy was alive after he was struck, he would have had to have been transported somewhere. Was it in the back of this little Civic, thrown, or was he picked up, and put into and then told along the way, yeah, I'm going to go get you help. I'm going to go get you help. And the guy is either unconscious, or he's like in that kind of, peri-mortem state, kind of like this, and you're driving down the road. What kind of ghoul does this? Wow. And then, because what they're saying, Dave, is that there is a high probability this guy was burned alive.
Right.
This guy was burned alive. Can you imagine having gasoline thrown all over you inside of a car after you've been struck by the car, just minding your own, man, not having a care in the world, and you're hit by this person that does this, and then thrown in and essentially barbecued at that point in time, alive. I got to tell you, this thing, the more we talk about it, the more absolutely grotesque this becomes. And it's not just the injuries, Dave. It's not just the injuries in this case. The grotesqueness that I'm really speaking to right now is how rotten someone's soul must have been that did this. So, Dave, you'd mentioned the wife receiving these checks out of the blue. Now, she's fully aware that her husband is now deceased, all right?
Mm-hmm.
She's got checks rolling in. I don't think the checks, I would imagine probably at first blush, she might rip open the envelope and say, oh, wow, maybe this is an insurance payment, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. And they don't really go into a lot of detail to talk about specifically how much each individual check was. But I think that there was an insurance payout, for this man, this Cates fellow that had died. And by the way, it's interesting to note that not only was he a state prosecutor in his real life, he had actually been a full colonel in the Army Reserve. So he's an attorney. So he was probably serving as a JAG officer,
right,
at the reserve level. And I'm thinking, oh my Lord, this guy is betraying trust all over the place. Well, most importantly, his marriage. And then secondly, the public trust, he's an elected official. And then, he swore, he took 2 oaths, Dave. He was sworn in as an attorney, he's sworn in as an officer in the United States Army. Lord have mercy.
When his wife goes to, gets the checks from Kurtz, I was thinking, maybe something to do with Apocalypse Now, something along those lines.
That's with a K. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I know.
I thought the same thing, man.
Okay. But a month after the funeral, a month after the full on military funeral, because he was no longer there to sweep up the messes that he had made. And this is the part that people forget. He fakes his death. So all the things that he was hiding, the balls he was juggling, well, there's nobody there to keep him juggling. So they start falling. And fairly quickly, we're talking in the days following the funeral. Okay. By the way, you know how they got an ID where they actually believed they were burying Cates? It came from a shoe. One of his shoes actually was used to say, yeah, that's his shoe. It just crazy that was the one thing they went, oh, yeah, it has to be him then. So anyway, he takes off and he goes to Lawrenceville, Georgia, rents an apartment, and he's living there under the name of Christopher E. Curtis, retired Army general. Okay. Not a colonel.
He's not going low profile. He's going,
yeah, buddy.
He's literally adopting a false identity based upon a rank that people don't realize. If you're a general in the Army, guess who has to facilitate that? The Congress of the United States. They approve all general ranks. Just imagine. I think the president has to sign off on it as well. Boy, you talk about rolling the dice, man.
Yeah, buddy. Well, Christopher E. Curtis, retired Army general living in Lawrenceville, Georgia, basically undone by his own stupidity. But he gets arrested. They bring him back to Mississippi. And this is, the Madison County grand jury is brought together and he's indicted there because not only is he charged with capital murder and arson, because now that we know we have him, who is that person that you killed? And because again, remember, Joe, that person that was injured with all those broken bones was alive when the fire with accelerants began. Yeah. So he's charged with capital murder and arson. But then Cates was also indicted in Hinds County for embezzling $233,000 from a farm co-op he did legal work for. And let's see, there was another motivation here for him faking his death to escape the indictment on that charge. It was to collect the $400,000 in life insurance policies that he had recently purchased. Okay. So we've got this money coming through. We got lots of problems, and they sit down to plea bargain with him, Joe. And the one thing that they did not do was make him identify the person he killed. They allowed him to get away with this. Okay. He ends up receiving a 20-year sentence for the charges of capital murder and arson. And Joe, I'm just here to tell you that that's not acceptable, which leads me to believe he didn't know the person he killed, that he randomly hit somebody, that he went out looking for somebody he could run over, somebody that he could, take out and do, which is exactly what he did. He probably scoped it out for a while ahead of time, but he ends up not being able to identify the individual maybe. And so there you go, because that's what we're still trying to do. Here we are. It's 2025. We're at the end of the year and we have a family. Okay. No matter what that person did before, during, or after, they had a mom and dad, they had family, And they've been gone now since 1983 because of this scumbag who was trying to take the easy way out of all the problems he had created for himself by stealing money that didn't belong to him. And he killed this guy in the worst way you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, he did. That's an aggravating circumstance. I understand why they went out after capital murder with that, because you're literally burning somebody alive. Yeah. Here's one more thing I forgot to mention that is kind of, they make a mention of the dead guy's teeth here.
Yeah, they didn't have any.
Yeah, and that absence of teeth did not happen as a result of fire. I'm wondering, first off, if this guy is naturally absent of dentition, or did this ghoul get a pair of pliers, I'm thinking needle nose, and go into this guy's mouth and extract teeth. And that's going to be dependent upon how badly the skull is charred. You know, teeth are going to last even when other bone, comes apart. And I say bone, teeth are not bone. I've said that before. So the teeth are going to be present even in the absence of bone or when bone is compromised. Again, that goes to motivation, but that leaves us with the big question that's still here literally at the end of 2025. Mm-hmm. We don't know who this guy is, but there's somebody out there that does want to know who he is other than us, and that's our friends at Othram. They've taken the reins on this case, and I think that this is kind of a worthy way to end our year coming up. Because Dave and I have spent a lot of time talking about Othram. I don't want to put words in my friend's mouth, but this is something that we actually believe in because it's a worthy pursuit. And how much more so in this case? Right now, Othram has $2,204.35 put toward this case. They got to get $7,500 in order to flip the switch on this. I urge you to go to their website, and if you will just, when you get to their website, look for the case that is entitled Madison County Coroner's Office and Rankin County Coroner's Office. That's Madison County Coroner's Office and Rankin County Coroner's Office. Look for that title in their articles. It's going to be you can find it at DNAsolves.com. That's DNAsolves.com, and check under their header called cases, and it'll pop up. If you can just send a couple of bucks, I'm going to send a couple of bucks toward this case to see if we can't get this thing resolved, if we can't get this thing rolling, because I don't know about you guys, whoever this person was, I don't care who they were, they did not deserve this. They did not deserve it. And guess what? Our man that said he was a retired Army general, he died in Parchment. And Parchment is the big house in Mississippi. It's like the main penitentiary there. All right. He died, I think, what was it, like back in 1990, Dave?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was 62 when he died.
And this thing is kind of fallen off the radar. We need to keep this case alive. No pun intended, or maybe it is intended. Wow. Because what we want to do is we want to see life breathed into these cases, these long since dead people that have no identification. Their families don't know about it. They don't know what happened to them. Let's all join together and breathe life into them and get resolutions for these cases. There's no way, and I don't necessarily believe in justice in this old world, all right? We're a fallen place. It's an evil place. I don't believe that justice really, truly comes to anyone in the whole grand scheme of things. But I do know that science can offer some answers. And, there's a little comfort in that. But I think that in the long run, it's something that could benefit. And it's also a warning. Again, I'll say this again. This is a warning out there to anyone who thinks that they have done things in secret and they thought that they were going to get away with it. Even in death, they thought that they were going to get away with it. And folks, that just ain't the case. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is body bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.